This is your host, Danny, and this is Grammar from English Plus Podcast. Today, we're going to continue the second part of our first chapter, Present and Past, Simple and Progressive. Last time, we talked about the present, and we had a lot of exercises on the website. Today, we're going to do just the same. We're going to talk about the simple past and the past progressive, and we will have a lot of exercises on the website. So take the link you can find in the description of the episode, go to the website, and do all the exercises, or at least most of them, to make sure that you understand everything we're talking about here. So it's not just, he's telling us about grammar. Well, that's great, but how do we use that? How do we practice that? I got you covered. Everything you need is on my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. Just take the link, go there, do the exercises, and make sure you understand every single thing I'm talking about here. And there's another link in the description of the episode that will take you to my Patreon page. Take the link, go to my Patreon page, become a patron, and support our learning community. Your support is the only way this learning community can continue. I'm so happy that we have 11 patrons today, but we're still a long way from being safe. We need 50 patrons before the end of the year. So become a patron, save English Plus, and help us grow and thrive together. This is episode 605, and with your support, there's nothing stopping us from continuing on and getting the next 600 episodes on the line. Now, without further ado, let's start talking about the simple past tense. So when do we use that simple past tense? When we say it snowed yesterday, or Tom watched TV last night. Well, this is past simple, but when do we use that? We use the simple past when we talk about one particular time in the past. At one particular time in the past, this happened. It began and ended in the past. It snowed yesterday, it started snowing yesterday, and it finished snowing yesterday. It snowed yesterday. I'm telling you about what happened yesterday, about some action that started in the past and finished in the past at one particular time. Now, as you may notice that most simple past verbs add ed or take an extra ed after the verb, so it becomes past. Like when we say snow, it becomes snowed. That is the past simple. Or watch, Tom watched TV last night. That is watch plus ed. And that is true about most verbs in the past simple. But unfortunately, some verbs are not the same. Some verbs are irregular verbs. And there's no point in just listing all the irregular verbs in this episode because there are hundreds of lists online. You can find it in your dictionary, you can find it online. Just search for irregular verbs and you will have an irregular verb list. For irregular verbs, well, they're irregular. So we don't have a rule to govern what to do and how to change them, etc. I'll give you a couple of examples. Jack went to work early. Well, Jack went, that's the past of go. So what? When we see a G and an O, we make it W-E-N-T? Not at all. It happened that here it changed completely. The verb is go. In the past, it becomes went. But another one, I came to work late. Well, came, C-A-M-E, is the past of come, C-O-M-E. Well, here we just change one letter. Sometimes we don't change anything. Like, for example, put and cut. They stay the same. Present, past, past participle, it's just the same. Put, put. Cut, cut. It's the same thing. Sometimes we change one letter, as you saw in this, come becomes came. Or we saw a great movie last night. That's the past of see. We changed two letters. So they're irregular. That's the point. You cannot depend on a rule just like with the ed. Now with the ed, it's simple. We just add ed. But with irregular verbs, you will have to know them. You will have to learn them by heart, unfortunately. But saying that, I do not recommend that you just go get yourself an irregular verb list and start memorizing. Not at all. Just keep it handy, keep it close, and check it from time to time. And when you want to use verbs in the past, you can check this list. And if you use ed with irregular verbs, they will sound weird. They will sound strange. And that will make you go to this list and check it. When you do this, in time, you will learn them all. But if you just memorize them out of context, you will memorize them for a couple of days, but then you will forget about most of them. So don't do that, please, but just keep this irregular verb list handy. Keep it close, because you would want to check it from time to time. And there is some kind of trick, because some irregular verbs are just the same, just like each other. So when you learn a couple of irregular verbs, that will make it easy for you to guess the past tense of some others. So just to recap here, we talk about the past simple, the tense we use when we want to talk about one particular time in the past. We're talking about something that happened in the past. It began and ended in the past. And we said that most verbs are regular. That means they take ed to make the past. But we also have a lot of other verbs that are irregular verbs. And here, we need to be careful. There are no rules. We just need to refer to the irregular verb list. And I'm just going to talk about one more irregular verb. That's verb to be, because it is a very common verb and we all need to know about that. Actually, we use it a lot. Well, we know that verb to be in the present is am, is, and are. Well, in the past, we only have two forms. We have was and were. For example, Emily was at the office this morning. Or you were tired yesterday. Now, was and were, when do we use them? Well, simply whenever you use are, you use were in the past. You are, you were. They were. We were. But for I, he, she, and it, so instead of am and is in the present, we use was in the past. So Emily here, she was at the office this morning. So that is the simple past form of verb to be. We have was and were. Now, before I talk about the form in a little bit more details, talk about the negative, affirmative, and questions, let me just tell you about something that is very common and a very common mistake when we want to talk about the past. Well, sometimes people start talking about the past. They start talking about a series of actions that happened in the past, but then they forget that they're talking about the past and they use the present. Well, I'm not saying that is entirely incorrect, because sometimes we can use that, but it is not safe to assume that this is okay, because you will have to use it in a very specific way. And I'm leaving that to another lesson. Let's stay on the safe side here and consider using the same tense, especially we're talking about the past here. Consider using past verbs for all the series of actions. When you talk about a series of actions that happened in the past, and you're talking about it in the past, obviously, remember to use them all in the past. I will give you an example. For example, we are talking about a ball game. Andrew caught the ball, ran down the field, and scored a point. Well, that is something very common in sports commentary, and you've heard that a million times, I'm pretty sure. But the point is, when you tell a story like this, it's a series of actions. Andrew caught the ball first, ran down the field next. Of course, you don't have to say first and next. I'm just saying that to show you that it's a series of actions. Andrew caught the ball, ran down the field, and scored a point. The very easy mistake, or a very common mistake here, is that people start with the past and then continue with the present. They say, Andrew caught the ball, runs down the field, and scores a point. Well, here you have two options. Either you start with the present, you say, Andrew catches the ball, runs down the field, and scores a point, which is okay. You're telling the story in the present to make it more active, and you have this option, of course. Or you can tell the story in the past, like I just did. But try not to mix them, especially if you're still not very sure about your tense usage. Sometimes we can mix, of course. I'm not saying it's impossible. But for now, let's try, especially when we talk about a series of actions, let's try not to mix tenses together, especially not present and past. Of course, we can mix past simple and past continuous like we did last time. We mixed present continuous and present simple, that's fine. But try not to mix two different times, past and present. That is tricky. It is difficult and it is very specific. We can use it, of course, but we can use it in very specific situations. And I promise I will talk about all these advanced points later in the course. But for now, let's stick to the important stuff, to the things we need to build a strong foundation in grammar first, and then we will talk about the nuances in advanced grammar. So that was about the past simple. It is simple, actually. It is the simplest of all tenses. It has no extra meaning, no extra layer of meaning. It's just I'm talking about something that happened in the past. But now, what about the form? Well, the form can be tricky. Now, remember last time we talked about the present simple, and we said that the form of the present simple can be tricky because of this extra S with he, she, it. Well, here we don't have this problem. With the past simple, you don't have the problem of he, she, it, because you have to know if the verb is regular or irregular. Regular, obviously, we add ed. Irregular depends. But when you figure out the form of the verb in the past, when you know work, worked, ed, it works the same with all pronouns. You don't have to change it with he, she, it. It's the same. But we still have the same, I'm not going to say issue, of course. We still have the same thing that we don't use an auxiliary verb or a helping verb with affirmative. So when we say I, you, etc., he, she, it, we, they, helped, we don't use did here, all right? Remember, we used with present simple, we use do or does because it's present. We use verb to do as an auxiliary verb for simple tenses. And that also works for the past simple, but for the past simple, we don't use do or does, of course, we use did. But we don't use it with affirmative. We don't say, I did help. Although it is possible, but that is something else. That is when you want to emphasize on something, and let's not talk about that today, because that's a topic for another episode. But for now, I helped, you helped. So in affirmative, we don't use did, we can use the verb in its conjugation, whether it's ed or it's irregular, went, etc. So we use this past form of the verb with affirmative and with affirmative only, because in negative and questions, we use did. And when we use did, we put the verb in the zero form, in infinitive. Now, we said I helped. I added an ed here. But if I say I did not or I didn't help, not ed again, because guess what? The helping verb or the auxiliary verb took the past form, which is did. So only one verb can take this past form. The other verb reverts back to its original form. So here, I did not help. You did not help. Nothing added to it. And if you say, for example, I went, well, guess what? In negative, you say, I didn't went? No, I didn't go. With irregular verbs, it's a little bit trickier, because with irregular verbs, you will be tempted to use the irregular form of the verb in the past in negative and questions. You will want to say, I didn't went. And that is a common mistake. A lot of people make this mistake, but you have to be careful. When we use didn't, or when we ask a question like did I, did you, did he, did she, etc., we use the main verb in its original form, in its zero form, infinitive, whatever you want to call it. So here, I didn't help. She didn't help, they didn't help, etc. And the good thing about the past simple, when you talk about the form, as I told you earlier, you don't have to worry about he, she, it. It's just the same for all of the pronouns. And it is the same story in questions. Of course, in questions, you will have to use did, and you will have to put it first, because you want to make a question, right? You don't say, I did. That's not a question. Did I? Did you? Did he? Did she? Did it? Did we? Did they? Etc. But the main verb, again, it is in its original zero form. Did I help? Did I go? Did you go? Did he, she, it work? Etc. Nothing added. The verb in its original form. And here, as I told you, you will have to remember that both about the regular verbs and the irregular verbs. And the irregular verbs can be trickier, as I told you, because you will be tempted to use the irregular verb form in affirmative, negative, and questions. Well, please don't. Don't do that. Don't use the irregular form in negative and questions. In negative and questions, the main verb is always in its original form. And finally, before we move on to work on some exercises, we have verb to be. Verb to be, which is I, he, she, it, was, etc. Yeah, that is just like verb to be in any tense. Well, verb to be is very strong on its own. It doesn't need any helping verbs. So we can make questions and negatives using verb to be alone. We say I, he, she was not here. We just add not and it becomes negative. Or we put was or were at first and it becomes a question. Was he here? Was she here? Were you there? Etc. So here, we can use verb to be on its own to make questions or negatives. We don't need did. Of course, you wouldn't say something like, I didn't be, or something like that. You've never heard of that. Now, the good thing about English that we have a lot of exposure. We have it in movies, we have it in games, we have it in songs, etc. So when we say something that sounds strange, we will know that there's something wrong about this, even if we don't know why. Now here in English Plus Grammar course, we're talking about the why. Why do we do that? Why do we do this? Why this is right? Why this is wrong? And more importantly, remember, as I always say, we are using tools to express what we want to say and write, obviously. So that is about the past simple. Now we will move on to some exercises. If you're just listening to the podcast, it might be a good idea now to take the link, go to the website, to the custom post I created for this episode, and start working on those exercises. Or you might choose to do them later. It's up to you. But if you try to do them right away, it's a very good way to check your understanding of this point before we move on to talk about the next point. So go to the website, do the exercises, check your understanding, check if you can do them correctly or not, and then we will come back to talk about the past continuous or the past progressive. So I hope you found the exercises useful, and I hope you got most of them correct, or even for the ones that were wrong, I hope you understand why these were wrong. But for now, let's get back to continue talking about the simple past and the past progressive. Now, we started talking about the past simple. It's simple. I walked to school yesterday. John lived in Paris for 10 years, but now he lives in Rome. I bought a new car 3 days ago. Well, what is in common between these three examples? The simple past indicates that an activity or situation began and ended at a particular time in the past, which is the same in these examples. I walked to school yesterday. It's over. That's it. I'm just telling you about what happened yesterday. John lived in Paris for 10 years, but now he lives in Rome. Something that happened in the past and ended in the past. I'm just telling you about the past. And nothing special, just something that happened. But if we start to add two actions together, things will get a little bit more specific. I'm not going to say tricky, but you will have to be careful here. Now, for example, if I say Rita stood under a tree when it began to rain, what does that mean? Rita stood under a tree when it began to rain, especially when we use this when. Now here, what do you think happened first? Did it begin to rain first, or did Rita stand under a tree first? Well, obviously, it began to rain first, and then Rita stood under a tree. So here, when we use when, and we have two verbs, obviously, Rita stood under a tree when it began to rain, that means that it began to rain first, then Rita stood under a tree. I'll give you another example so that you understand it better. When Mrs. Chu heard a strange noise, she got up to investigate. So what happened first? When Mrs. Chu heard a strange noise, that's what happened first. When she heard that strange noise, she got up to investigate. Another example. When I dropped my cup, the coffee spilled on my lap. Well, of course, here it's common sense. You can't spill the coffee if you don't drop the cup. So here, when I dropped my cup, that happened first. The coffee spilled on my lap. Well, you might say, what are you talking about? This is obvious. This is common sense. What's the big deal about this? There's no big deal about that. But when we start adding past continuous with past simple within the same sentence, and we use when to talk about this, it might become a little bit confusing, and you might get confused about which action happened first. So that's the point. That's why I gave you this example, which is common sense. You would say, yeah, this is common sense. What's the big deal? Yeah, it's not a big deal. I can understand. You're telling me that this is simple. But now let's compare the sentences, the simple sentences I just gave you, with some other sentences where I use the past continuous. I was walking down the street when it began to rain. So here, what do you think happened first? Or, it's not exactly happened first. What was happening? What was in action? What was in progress when another thing happened? Well, obviously, something was in progress. Yeah, it started to happen first, obviously. But here, I was walking down the street when it began to rain. So here, definitely, it is not that I started walking down the street when it began to rain. it began to rain first, then I started walking down the street. Not at all. I was in the middle of doing something. This action was happening, was in progress when the other action happened. I was walking down the street when it began to rain. And here, it's just the opposite of what I just told you. In the earlier example, I told you that Rita stood under a tree when it began to rain. So that means it began to rain first, then Rita stood under a tree. And here we use both simple past. But when we use past continuous with past simple, the story is different. When it began to rain, that happened later. That didn't happen first. So when here is used in a different way, or actually the sequence of actions is different in this sentence. Let me give you another example. While I was walking down the street, it began to rain. So here, instead of when, I can use while. And when I use while, I can put it with the action that was in progress. While I was walking down the street, what happened? It began to rain. Now, remember we said Rita stood under a tree when it began to rain. And that means that it began to rain first and then Rita stood under a tree. But what if we say Rita was standing under a tree when it began to rain? Which action do you think happened first? Well, obviously, Rita was standing under a tree. That was happening first, before it started to rain. So, you see, these little differences are very important for you to express yourself in a correct way, especially when you want to talk about two actions that happen, and it might be important for you to say which action happened first. You don't always have to use first, then, etc. It is not very common, especially in speaking. You wouldn't hear a lot of people say, first, Rita was standing under a tree. Then it began to rain. Well, that's kind of awkward. Nobody talks like that. Even in writing, it is awkward. Because first of all, you have two sentences instead of one, and that's not a good idea. And the second thing, it's just strange. People don't usually talk like that. You would say Rita was standing under a tree when it began to rain. That's one sentence. That's a lot better, a lot shorter, and to the point. We understand exactly what you're trying to tell us, that she was standing, that was happening first, that was in progress first, and then it began to rain. All right? And I will give you one more example, which is a little bit different, but it is important because the past progressive is not always used with past simple. Sometimes we don't use two actions in one verb. We just use the past continuous. Like when we say, at 8 o'clock last night, I was studying. Well, guess what? At this specific time in the past, something was happening. Something was in progress. Now, if we compare it to the present continuous, when I say I am studying, what does that mean? I am studying right now, at this very moment. Yeah, we can say it for things that are happening around the moment, stuff like that, and that's good. But when we talk about the present continuous and say that things that are happening at the moment, that is, this moment is specific and things are happening around it, and this moment is now. That's why it is present. But here, we specify the same point, but in the past. At 8 o'clock last night, guess what was happening at this time? I was studying. You can specify a time in the past like that and talk about what was happening around that time in the past, what was in progress around that time in the past, and then you can use the past continuous. So here, my studying began sometime before 8, was in progress at that time, and probably continued. Well, it doesn't have to continue. That's not necessary. The important thing is that at that time in the past, it was going on. It was in progress. And now saying that, especially the first examples I gave you about the past continuous and the past simple, I will have to say that it is not always necessary to use past simple, past continuous. You can use both past progressive or past continuous within the same sentence if the two actions were happening, were in progress at the same time. It is not like one action was in progress and then there was this other action that just happened, which is, to be honest, the more common case. But here, even this is not as common as the first couple of examples I gave you of past continuous used with past simple, but it is also possible to use both parts of the sentence in the past progressive. For example, while I was studying in one room of our apartment, my roommate was having a party in the other room. So both things were happening, were in progress at the same time. Sometimes the past progressive is used in both parts of a sentence when two actions are in progress simultaneously. So that is basically the difference between the past simple and the past progressive. And to talk about the form of the past progressive, it's a lot easier. Just when I said last time about the present continuous or the present progressive that it is easy because the main verb is always in ing, and it is the same case here. The main verb is always in ing form. We always put it in ing form. We always use verb to be as an auxiliary verb, just like we did with present continuous. But guess what? Because present continuous, we use am, is, or are. That's the form of verb to be we use in present continuous. But since here we're talking about past continuous or past progressive, what form of verb to be should we use? Well, obviously past. And we just talked about the past form of verb to be, and that is was or were. So we use was or were to make the past progressive. But the main verb is always in ing. Piece of cake. And now once more, I will encourage you to go to the website, do some exercises, check your understanding of what we've talked about so far, especially the differences between the past simple and past progressive, before we move on to talk about the last point of today's episode. And by the way, at the end of the episode, I will have a few sentences. They will also be on the website, of course, but I will include them as audio in the podcast, and I will ask you some questions about some sentences, whether they're correct or incorrect, and you will have to explain why. You can do that in the podcast. So if you don't have time to go to the website, well, it's a shame because you're missing out on a lot of good opportunities. But I understand some of you are just listening because you're doing other things while you're listening and you can't just go to the website. You may check it later, by the way. Don't forget about that. But don't worry, we have an exercise that we're going to do together in this episode before it ends. But right now, if you have time, if you can do it, just take the link and go to the website EnglishPlusPodcast.com to the custom post, obviously, and do some exercises before we move on and talk about the very last point in today's episode before we wrap up and finish today's episode about past simple and past progressive.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Looking to enhance your English skills while exploring a world of knowledge? Then English Plus Podcast website is just for you. Dive into diverse topics ranging from science to literature, history to business, and myths to modern insights. Each episode from our podcast or article from our magazine is a journey of learning and discovery, designed to not only improve your language skills, but also broaden your understanding of the world. Join us at English Plus Podcast, where language meets limitless learning. Tune in today and take your English to the next level. Visit EnglishPlusPodcast.com to start your journey. English Plus Podcast, language, learning, enlightenment. Never stop learning with English Plus. And now, before we finish this episode, let me tell you about one little thing, but it is used, and it is used quite often actually, to talk about unfulfilled intentions. But let me give you an example so that you understand what I'm talking about. Jack was going to go to the movie last night, but he changed his mind. So what happened? Did he go? Did he not? Well, obviously he didn't. He changed his mind. He was going to go. He was going to go. That is the expression we use to talk about unfulfilled intentions. Was or were going to. We use that expression or that structure to talk about past intentions. Usually, these are unfulfilled intentions. That means activities someone intended to do but did not do. Now, the meaning of the sentence I just gave you, that Jack was planning to go to the movie, but he didn't go. Maybe something came up. Maybe he just changed his mind. Whatever. But he was planning to do this. That was his intention. But remember, we're talking about unfulfilled intentions. Now, yes, was and were going to do something. That is one way to talk about unfulfilled intentions, but that's not the only way. Well, we can use the past progressive with certain verbs to talk about unfulfilled intentions. Verbs like plan, hope, intend, or think about. If we use them in the past progressive, we can express unfulfilled intentions by using these verbs in past progressive. For example, I was planning to go to the party, but I didn't. I was hoping to stay later and see him, but I couldn't. I was intending to come to the game, but something came up the last minute and I couldn't make it. I was thinking about going, but I didn't. So all of these are unfulfilled intentions. We had the intention to do that. We were planning to do this, but something came up, or we just changed our mind, or whatever. But the point is that these things didn't happen. Unfulfilled intentions. And that's closely related to the past progressive. That's why I talk about that. And that's the last point of this episode. Now we have one last thing we're going to do together to check our knowledge of everything we talked about in chapter 1. And here I'm talking about present and past, simple and progressive. We have 10 sentences here, and you will also see the sentences on the website. If you want to go there, the link is in the description of the episode. But anyway, we'll do these together. So I will give you the sentence, I will give you some time to think about it, and then we'll do it together. So, are you ready? Let's do this and check our understanding not only of today's episode, but of chapter 1, which was last week's episode and today's episode. Breakfast is an important meal. I always eat a big breakfast. I'll say that again. Breakfast is an important meal. I'm always eat a big breakfast. First of all, you will have to decide whether this is correct or incorrect. And if it is incorrect, you will have to correct the sentence and think about the reason why. Ready? Think about it, and we'll do it together in a little bit. So what do you think? Well, obviously here there's something wrong about the sentence. Breakfast is an important meal, that's okay. But I'm always eat, it doesn't work. You cannot say I'm always eat. That's wrong. You either want to say I'm always eating, or you have to say I always eat. So verb to be is used with continuous, with progressive. And here we use verb to be, but we keep eat, which is the base form or the zero form of the verb. And that's something we do with simple tenses. So it's either this or that. But coming back to the meaning of the sentence, I always eat a big breakfast, I'm talking about something habitual, so we'd better use the present simple to express that idea. And here we should say I always eat and drop this am. We don't say I'm always eat, and that's a common mistake, by the way. I'm always eat. I hear that a lot. People use verb to be for everything. You have to be careful. Don't do that. Don't use verb to be unless you really want to use it. You know that you need to use it. And here is an example of a situation where you don't need verb to be. So the first sentence is wrong. And now let's move on to the second sentence. While I was working in my office yesterday, my cousin stops by to visit me. Do you think anything is wrong with the sentence? Well, where is the mistake? I want you to spot this mistake and correct the sentence. Think about it. Well, here obviously there's something wrong about talking about the past and the present at the same time. Doesn't make sense. While I was working in my office yesterday, that's in the past. So the thing that happened while this thing was in progress should be past. But what did I say? I said my cousin stops by to visit me. So I used the present simple here, and it is a mistake. I should say my cousin stopped. ED, past simple, not present simple. All right? I hope you got that right. Now for the next sentence. Yuki stayed home because she catched a bad cold. And by the way, here, if you see it on the website, you will see another hidden mistake here, because stayed here, I spelled it S-T-A-I-E-D. Yuki stayed home because she catched a bad cold. What do you think? Where is or where are the mistakes in this sentence? Think about it. Well, obviously, the first thing is hidden, and I know because this is an audio podcast, you might not see it. But as I told you, stayed, it's in the past, and I spelled it S-T-A-I-E-D. Well, actually, this is a mistake. We should say S-T-A-Y-E-D, not I-E-D. But there's another thing you should have spotted anyway, because I said she catched a bad cold. Well, she catched, that is one of the verbs that you're going to hear, and you're going to think to yourselves that there is something wrong about it. Catched, I've never heard of that before. It doesn't sound right. And when it doesn't sound right, go check your irregular verb list because obviously catch is an irregular verb. And catch in the past is not catched, it's caught. It's C-A-U-G-H-T, caught. So here, Yuki stayed, with a Y, home because she caught a bad cold, not she catched. Now for the next sentence. My brother looks like our father, but I am resembling my mother. Once again, my brother looks like our father, but I am resembling my mother. What's wrong with that? Think about it.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Unlock the marvels of mycology and take a journey of deep discovery into the divine. LordofSpore.com has 21 unique varieties of magic mushroom spores that will open doors you never knew existed. From the shamanic rituals of 10,000-year-old tribes, to Plato, Socrates, the Dionysian mysteries, and even early Christianity, entheogens have been the key to unlocking the secrets of the infinite realm that we are all part of, offering us mere mortals a glimpse into the sacred meaning of everything we see, and everything we don't. Join us on our journey. It starts with a few microscopic mushroom spores, and it grows into a network across time and space, connecting us all to infinity and beyond.
Well, for the first part of the sentence, my brother looks like our father. Once again, the common mistake of using verb to be with everything, which is not necessary. Here, my brother looks like our father. As simple as that. It's simple present. We don't need verb to be unless it is the main verb. But here it's not the main verb. Look is the main verb. My brother looks like our father. And here in the second part of the sentence, but I am resembling my mother. Well, here resemble comes in a stative meaning. Remember stative verbs we talked about last time? Here, we shouldn't say I am resembling. Well, the form is present continuous, but we shouldn't use the present continuous here because I'm talking about something that is just a stative verb. I resemble my mother. Now, for those of you who didn't get the chance to listen to the first episode from this grammar course, I talked extensively about stative verbs back then. So you can check it out if you want. If this is something new to you, you can go back to this episode, which I posted last week, and check everything there is to know about stative verbs. And by the way, talking about stative verbs, yesterday I didn't talk about stative verbs again because it's the same story. But guess what? The things we talked about stative verbs last time apply to past progressive. Because stative verbs don't work with progressive tenses, all of the progressive tenses, not only with present continuous or present progressive. The same things we talked about last time in relation to the present continuous work the same way for the past continuous today. So you can think about stative verbs in a way that they don't work in continuous or in progressive tenses. And now, that was about this sentence. Let's move on and talk about the next sentence. June, are you listen to me? I am talk to you. What's wrong with that? Well, it's obvious, but what's wrong with that? Well, obviously here, there's something big wrong about this. Again, I'm using verb to be and it sounds right, but the main verb doesn't sound right. June, are you listen to me? What does that mean? If you want to say, are you listen, you want to use the simple present, you would want to go like, do you listen to me? But do you listen to me doesn't work here because I'm asking you right now. June, are you listening to me? Are you listening to me? That's present continuous. I am talking to you. Are you listening to me? I'm talking to you. So obviously not are you listen and I am talk. Doesn't work. You should either use present continuous, which is the correct choice here, or present simple if it is in general. But here it is present continuous. June, are you listening to me? I am talking to you. Now the next sentence. While I was surfing the internet yesterday, I was finding a really interesting website. What's wrong with that? Well, there's nothing wrong about the first part. I was surfing the internet yesterday. That is an action that takes time. It was in progress. While I was surfing the internet yesterday, something happened. Now, I said that it might be that two actions were in progress in the past, but here you will have to use your common sense. Well, here I was surfing the internet yesterday. That makes sense. That is something that takes time. That is something that can be in progress. And it was in progress in the past. I was surfing the internet yesterday. I was finding a really interesting website. That doesn't make any sense. You just find something at an instant. It is not something that happens over time. Searching or surfing, in this case, is okay. That can take time, but finding doesn't take time. It just happens at an instant. And that means that it doesn't work with the past continuous. But we should say here, while I was surfing the internet yesterday, I found a really interesting website. I found the website. Maybe I stayed on this website for hours. I don't know. That's another story. But the verb find, that happens at an instant, or that happened actually, because we're talking about the past. So I found a really interesting website. All right? So here, the first part is okay, but the second part doesn't make any sense. While I was surfing the internet yesterday, I found a really interesting website. And by the way, as you might have noticed, find is not a regular verb. It's an irregular verb. Find, found. Now for the next sentence. Did you spoke English before you were come here? Oh, a lot of problems in this one. But anyway, did you spoke English before you were come here? What do you think? Well, let's start with the first part of the sentence. Did you spoke? Now, the problem is, spoke is the past of speak, and that's right. It is an irregular verb, so it doesn't take ed. It's not speaked, obviously. It is spoke. But what's the problem here? That it is a question. And we already used an auxiliary verb, which is did. Did you? So here, when we use the auxiliary verb, remember what I said about the main verb? What happens to the main verb when we use an auxiliary verb? It goes back to its original form, zero form, infinitive. Speak. Did you speak? Not did you spoke. And that is a common mistake. That's one of the most common mistakes out there. To use the past, especially the past of irregular verbs, and keep it the same way in questions and in negatives. So it's not did you spoke, it's did you speak. So that's the first part. But let's take a look at the second part. There is also something wrong about the second part. Before you were come here. Well, why do we use verb to be? Again, as I said, one of the most common mistakes about verb to be is that we use it all the time. Don't use it all the time unless you really want to use it. One way to use it is to use it as an auxiliary verb for progressive tenses or for continuous tenses. But here it's not continuous. I'm just saying before you came here. It's in the past. Simple. Before you came here, not before you were coming. It doesn't make any sense. Before you were coming, did you speak English? Well, that's weird. I'm just saying before you came here, did you speak English? So before you came here, not before you were come here. All right? Now for the next sentence. I am not agree with your opinion. What do you think? I am not agree with your opinion. Well, obviously here, again, verb to be. I know by now you say, yeah, we understand we don't use verb to be, but it's really necessary. I am listing as many examples as possible as mistakes here because I've heard that over and over again. People keep using verb to be all the time. Please don't. I am not agree. Well, what's the problem here? Do you want to say I'm not agreeing, or do you want to say I do not agree? Or I don't agree. Here it's either I don't agree or I am not agreeing. Well, I'm not agreeing doesn't work because agree here is a stative verb, not an action in progress. So we'd better stick to the present simple, and the present simple, we don't use am as an auxiliary verb, we use do or does. And here, I do not agree with your opinion. Or obviously for short, we say I don't agree with your opinion. All right, now for the next sentence. My roommate usually watch television, listen to music, or going out in the evening. What's wrong with that? My roommate usually watch television, listen to music, or going out in the evening. What do you think? Well, here we have a couple of ideas. First of all, remember what I said about the sequence of tenses. When you want to talk about something in the present, just keep going in the present and usually using the same tense, usually. But if you want to talk about the past, it's the same way. Now here, obviously, all the verbs, watch television, listen to music, going out, they're all in the present in a way. But going out here is just an ing, so it doesn't make any sense. But anyway, you want to use them all in the present simple because you're talking about something that happens usually. My roommate usually does this, does that, etc. So here, you're talking about something habitual that your roommate does. you might as well use the present simple to express that, right? So we agree that the present simple is the best tense to use in this situation. But then, what did we say? My roommate, he or she obviously, but he or she, we need an S. And don't forget that. That's also one of the most common mistakes, to forget the S with he, she, and it. Now here we should say, my roommate usually watches television, listens to music, or goes out in the evening. You don't mix ing with simple present just like that. It is not continuous. You're just talking about what happens usually. So there's no need to include the present continuous, and by just adding ing just like that doesn't make any sense. So here, my roommate usually watches television, listens to music, or goes out in the evening. And now let's move to the next sentence. And by now you might say, well, all of the sentences are wrong. Nothing is correct, right? Well, you never know. I might include one correct sentence. I might not. I might be that tricky. Anyway, the next sentence. Right now, Sally in the kitchen eating breakfast. Right now, Sally in the kitchen eating breakfast. What do you think is wrong here? Well, obviously, there's something missing. Right now, yeah, it's the present continuous. Nobody can argue with that. You're talking about what is happening at the moment, right now, and you use eating breakfast, which is ing. That's perfect, but where is verb to be? You cannot form present continuous without verb to be. Now, here it might be a little bit trickier because you have in the kitchen in between. So you might say to yourself, well, what about verb to be? Sometimes it is tricky when there is something in between verb to be and the verb in ing or the main verb. So you might wonder, should we keep verb to be? Should we leave it out? Where should we put verb to be? Well, here, the original sentence is right now, Sally is eating breakfast. That is the original thing we want to say. But we might add the place where this is happening, and we might say, right now, Sally is in the kitchen eating breakfast. But is very important to add verb to be when you want to use the present continuous. There is no continuous without verb to be. And here, because it's present continuous, obviously, we should use the present form of verb to be, is. Sally is. Sally is in the kitchen eating breakfast. Now for the next example. While I'm driving home last night, I heard a strange noise in the engine. While I'm driving home last night, I heard a strange noise in the engine. What's wrong with that? A couple of things, actually. Think about it. So, here, while I'm driving home last night, present continuous for what was happening last night doesn't make any sense, obviously. We should say while I was driving home last night. I'm talking about the past, something that was going on, something that was in progress in the past, so we should use the past progressive, not the present progressive. And here, I heard. Now, you might not exactly understand that if you're not looking at it, because you will think that I just mispronounced this word. But actually, I put here and I just added ed. So I thought the best way to pronounce here with ed is heard. But there's nothing like that. We say hear in present, but in the past, it's irregular. We say heard. And you might say heard, but that's also ed. No, it's not ed. It's just a d. No e. And just because we don't add ed, just a d in this case, it is irregular. I heard a strange noise in the engine. All right, 2 more sentences and I will let you go. I hope you're still with me, and I also hope that you found some time to go to the website and do the other exercises. But now for the last 2 sentences. Why are you talking about me? I'm not appreciate that. You hear that all the time. You might say, well, nobody makes those mistakes. Well, everybody makes those mistakes. And by the way, talking about this, making mistakes is a natural way to learn. If you make those mistakes, don't feel bad. That's why we're talking about them. That's why we're here, right? So don't ever feel bad about making any mistakes. Actually, I really feel happy when I get something from my students and it contains a lot of mistakes. Because there's something for me to work on. There's something for them to work on. There's something clear about the problems that we should solve. We can see them. Anyway, not to dwell on that, don't worry about the mistakes you make. Even if you make most of the mistakes I talked about here, that's fine. That's why we're here. We're here to learn, right? So let me say this sentence again. Why you talking about me? I'm not appreciate that. What do you think? Well, obviously, Again, we forgot about verb to be here. Why you talking about me? It's not why you talking about me. Why are you talking about me? Because that's something you are doing. It's not in progress at this very moment, but it's happening around now. Why are you talking about me, especially in a bad way? I do not appreciate that. That's a stative verb. Yes, the context might be present continuous or present progressive, but this is a stative verb. I do not appreciate that. So, why are you talking about me? I do not appreciate that. Now for our very last sentence, it's a long one. Yesterday, while I was sitting at my computer, Shelley was suddenly coming into the room. I wasn't knowing she was there. I was concentrate hard on my work. When she suddenly speak, I am jump, she startled me. Well, a lot of mistakes, I know. I will say that again. Yesterday, while I was sitting at my computer, Shelley was suddenly coming into the room. I wasn't knowing she was there. I was concentrate hard on my work. When she suddenly speak, I am jump. She startled me. So, what do you think? Take your time. Well, at least the first part of the sentence is correct. Yesterday, while I was sitting at my computer. And by the way, talking about that, just try not to say while I was sitting on my computer because that's kind of strange. How can you work while you're sitting on the computer? You don't sit on top of the computer. You sit at the computer, that means you're working. Sit on the computer, that's strange. You're crushing the computer. But that aside, let's get back to the tenses here. So the first part is correct. Yesterday, while I was sitting at my computer, Shelley suddenly, I'm talking about something that just happened, not was happening. Again, like the earlier example, some verbs do not make sense in context to be continuous. Well, here, she was coming into the room. Well, that didn't take time. She just came into the room. So Shelley came into the room. I wasn't knowing she was there. Well, here, the problem again, know is a stative verb. So I didn't know she was there. I was concentrate. Well, it doesn't work. You want to use the past continuous? Fine. And actually, it is the best tense to use here. I was concentrating hard on my work. That was something in progress. I was concentrating hard on my work, not I was concentrate. When she suddenly speak, well, here, if you want to use it in present, you should say speaks. And if you want to use it in the past, you should say spoke. But remember, we talked about the series of actions. When we talk about a series of actions like this, we should remember to keep the sequence of tenses the same. I'm talking about the past, keep it in the past. Doesn't make any sense to use present and past together. That's an advanced thing, we'll talk about it later, but for now, just keep the sequence of tenses. So here, the past simple. When she suddenly spoke, I am jump. Again, why? I am jump. I jumped. I jumped. She spoke, I jumped. That happened, I jumped. She startled me. Not she startled. You either present or past, but here we continue the series of actions and we should say, she startled me. And with that, we come to the end of this episode. I hope you learned a lot of new things. I hope you practiced some of the things that you know, but maybe you learned a couple of new things. And with the exercises on the website, I hope that you learned even more. If you haven't done the exercises, don't worry. You can do them today. You can do them tomorrow just to check your understanding. The exercises on the website are meant for you to review the knowledge that I tried to give you here. Some of the exercises for other episodes are just for fun, to check your understanding, comprehension check, if you will, like the ones especially for our Learn From Games. That's Dan RPG, role-playing game, obviously. And some of them are kind of more analytical, like with stories and the literary episodes. But for this episode, for word power episodes, they're very important to make sure you remember the things you learn about English. These are pure English language episodes, so the exercises are very important for you to make sure you remember the information. And remember, it's not just about getting the answers right, because that's just half of it. The other half is to understand why this is right and why this is wrong. So don't forget to take the link you can find in the description and go to my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com, to the custom post I created for this episode. And don't forget about the second link in the description of the episode that will take you to my Patreon page. You can support our learning community to grow bigger and to thrive. But now I need your support to survive, because I need 50 patrons by the end of this year to be able to continue creating the content you like and to be able to serve the learning community to the best of my ability. With that being said, this is your host, Danny. Thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I will see you next time.